Oh boy, more old shit. This is just kind of a trend that I want to talk about in terms of the current generation of gaming, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series S and X. Pretty much the act of remastering games from the previous generation, which is kind of carrying over from the PS4 and Xbox One generation. And, you know, that had its own complaints like earlier on. And looking back, it was pretty silly. This was the little bastard to start that whole controversy. Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. I believe this came out in very early 2014, pretty much like a couple months after the PS4 and Xbox One officially launched. And I remember people going like, it's just like, oh man, what's the point of that? You know, like they just put this out on Xbox 360 and PS3. Keep in mind, that was like, like March 2013 when Tomb Raider originally came out, and then around January 2014, Definitive Edition came out for the PS4 and Xbox One, and I remember all these people commentating on it just kind of going like, oh, what's the point? Or like, wow, that's a big slap in the face. Dude, that's what these companies do. They're just trying to find another means to release this game. And it's not like they're releasing Definitive Edition on the exact same console. This is on a completely new console. It makes perfect sense why they put Tomb Raider on a console it wasn't playable on. The PS4 and Xbox One didn't have backwards compatibility, so it just made sense. At least the Xbox One didn't have backwards compatibility for, you know, the first like half of its life. So it made perfect sense to bring over Xbox 360 and PS3 games onto these new generation consoles, so then you can play them, not only for people who haven't played these games before, but also people that, you know, want just better running versions of those 360 and PS3 games on a console. And let me tell you, back when the PS4 and Xbox One were originally announced, you know, they were like, oh, no backwards compatibility because the architecture is too different. So, you know, obviously they didn't do backwards compatibility because they couldn't, you know, feasibly do it. Or so I thought. So I'm not gonna be a conspiracy theorist here and be like, oh, they didn't put backwards compatibility with the PS3 and Xbox 360 into those consoles just so then they could re-release all these games. But I'm not gonna deny it. This generation was chock full of the definitive edition, like the remasters, the remakes, the ports, all that stuff. Basically just ways to sell you a game from the previous generation all over again. And it made sense, you know, like a lot of those games really benefited from just like a bit of cleanup from being on better hardware, you know, like better load times, better textures, better resolution, better frame rate, all that stuff. Even if a remaster definitive edition just didn't really feel like this massive leap forward, when you actually sit down and play it and then you go back to the original version on Xbox 360, you can tell like it's just like, well, damn, you know, like it's just like, this was definitely worth it. But sometimes it felt a little like, all right. So God of War 3 Remastered release, like this was in like 2015, back when it kind of felt like Sony was struggling to put out PS4 exclusives at a decent rate. You know, this was before Uncharted 4 came out, and Ratchet and Clank, and Horizon Zero Dawn, and all of these other games that became like these massive PS4 exclusives. And it just kind of felt like they were just kind of trickling out PS3 remasters. You know, we got The Last of Us Remastered, the Uncharted Nathan Drake Collection, and God of War 3 Remastered. And this just felt kind of like, okay. I mean, the PS3 had the God of War Saga, which literally had like all the God of War games up until that point. And yeah, the PS4 just got God of War 3. Again. Keep in mind, you know, like when you would see God of War 3 remastered, it would kind of be like, oh, well, this isn't a big deal. You know, like, oh, this looks the exact same back then. Now, looking back retrospectively, when you compare God of War 3 on the PS3 to God of War 3 on the PS4, you can see that massive difference in terms of resolution and frame rate, all that stuff. It just looks and runs much better here than it did on the PS3. Though, it just felt a little odd to just kind of do God of War 3 and only God of War 3 and not, you know, God of War 1 and 2. But, you know, like they weren't looking to do remakes or anything like that for PS2 era games. PS3 and 360 era games were prime for PS4 upgrades because, you know, you basically had to touch up the game here and there for it to look like what's basically a modern game. And God of War 3 still looked really good, so just kind of touching it up a little bit here and there, you know, it kind of fell right in place with all the other, like, PS4 games releasing. This generation was pretty much the definitive edition, remastered, remade generation, where we just got all of these re-releases of 360 and PS3 games. I think there was a lot of merit to it. Obviously, some people had a problem with that. And I do think it kind of brings the generation down a bit in general, because instead of, you know, putting out original titles to kind of define the 8th generation, it kind of felt like a lot of the time was spent going back and re-releasing and remastering games from the previous generation or even beyond that. So while I applaud this effort, you know, I'm just like, hey, it's great to have these better running versions. You know, I think it kind of brought down the 8th generation as a whole, and to me, it feels like that generation is really defined by these re-releases. But they have merit. Most of these games you could not play on that console. You know, the PS4 and Xbox One, no backwards compatibility, so if you wanted to play the first 3 BioShocks, just made sense. Now, halfway through the generation, though, like, the Xbox One received backwards compatibility with the Xbox 360 and original Xbox. So it was limited backwards compatibility, but we took what we could get. It was the Xbox One generation, all right? It was Crackdown 3 or nothing, compared to the Xbox Series X generation, where it's nothing or nothing. But this was a really great initiative by Microsoft to just kind of, like, you know, make the Xbox One feel like good. That damn console had so much bad press with its horrific reveal of just like, oh man, you have to stay connected online. You can't play used games. It was horrible, and the Xbox One barely ever recovered. The PS4 was like the go-to console for most people just because the Xbox One reveal was so horrendous. So to kind of save some face and to just kind of, you know, make people feel like the Xbox brand is cool again and really nice, they did backwards compatibility with the 360. Now, it was limited backwards compatibility. They didn't do every game, mainly because they couldn't do every game. There was so much released on the 360, and it was kind of down to, like, you know, working with the companies that had all the rights in place to re-release their games again via backwards compatibility on the Xbox One. But Microsoft still did it, and it was really cool that they did. That, of course, made some remasters and definitive editions a little weird. You know, they did Gears of War Ultimate Edition on the Xbox One after they already did the backwards compatibility update for the Xbox One, where Gears of War was included. I just always found that really weird, and because of that, like, I don't know, I always looked at that Gears of War remaster as kind of like, what's the point? I feel like overall that was just kind of like a pet project, or just like a test project for the developers to make, to then go on and make Gears of War 4. But it still felt like really weird, especially considering if you got Gears of War Ultimate Edition, they gave you the Xbox 360 backwards compatibility versions of, like, the 4 Gears of War games on that console for free. So it just kind of felt really pointless. And also, you know, it's just like, all right, so you're only going to do Gears of War 1. Why not Gears of War 2 and 3 and Judgment as well? Like, why don't you just make a Gears of War, like, collection or something like that? And it felt like they were kind of going for like, all right, no, we're going to go for quality over quantity. We're just going to focus on this one game to give it the best, like, attention possible, which is another thing I saw during this generation, you know, just kind of going for like, no, we're going to focus on just this one game. We aren't going to do the whole series or anything like that, which they would usually do, like, the whole series with stuff like, I remember, like, the Mega Man Anniversary Collection on GameCube, PS2, original Xbox. That did Mega Man 1 through 8 all on one disc, which was pretty wild. Then again, you know, like, those are easily not the best versions of those games. They feel a little off. It's still perfectly fine to play those versions, but then you look at something like the Mega Man Legacy Collection during this generation, and they only did 1 through 6, and that got some criticism at first, but they really made sure, like, these are very good playing versions of those games, you know, very well emulated, a lot of extra challenges, and it just feels better. It feels right compared to the Anniversary Collection, which should give you more bang for your buck, but still, I think they were kind of going for more quality this generation. But that Gears of War release really does kind of set me up for what I want to talk about here is, what the They're doing this all over again. So I've had a PS5 and Xbox Series X for a little over a year now, and I do enjoy my time with them. I think they feel like just like much smoother PS4s and Xbox One X's, you know? Like, it's just like the load times and just the speed of the UI and just hopping into a game, going out, all that stuff. It just feels good. It feels good to control. And the controllers feel good too. The Xbox Series X controller, but also the Series S controller, feel really nice, even if they're very, very, very similar to the Xbox One's controller. But the PS5, like that controller, it just feels next gen, you know? It feels like, oh man, I'm in the future. A lot of its features are kind of like bringing over stuff from like the Nintendo Switch, like HD Rumble from the Switch, and it definitely feels a lot more pronounced on the PS5's DualSense controller, but you know, it still feels like just that extra little level of feeling pronounced, as I put it. It makes it feel that much more modern and futuristic and advanced. I really do enjoy it. The problem is, there's not really a ton of stuff to do on these consoles that you really couldn't have done elsewhere. A lot of the games are cross-gen with PS4 and Xbox One, which is good overall for the consumer, but, you know, it kind of makes you wonder. It's just like, if this game wasn't cross-gen and it was only for the PS5, you know, what would it look like? Would it be that much more advanced? Not really sure, because Demon's Souls is a PS5 exclusive game, so is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart and Returnal. And honestly speaking, I didn't really notice a huge difference between like playing those games and similar games from the previous generation. Obviously, there were differences in terms of load times and just quality, graphics quality, but you know, playing Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, I kind of felt like this looks really good and definitely better than the PS4 game, but this does not feel like something that really couldn't run on the PS4. The PS4 Ratchet & Clank came out in 2016. With the amount of advancements they've made just making games for that platform, I frankly don't really have much of a doubt that Rift Apart could work on PS4. It might take a little bit of finagling and a lot of work, but I feel like it could happen. But those are kind of like some of the major only PS5 exclusive games. Other than that, it's a lot of cross-gen stuff like Horizon Forbidden West and Gran Turismo 7, God of War Ragnarok. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with just how hard it is to just kind of finish projects right now, and just, you know, shipment times are being delayed, graphics cards and just chips, computer chips, all that stuff, hardware, everything's having shipping problems right now. It's just hard to get things done quick right now. So, you know, I'm not gonna be like, what are you doing, Sony? Just more so like, this. I just have a problem with this whole remaster trend of like taking PS4 games and putting them on PS5. And it's just kind of bizarre to me, because it's getting like a similar amount of flack that the original remaster trend on PS4 got. But this made a lot more sense to me, because it's just like, you couldn't play the first 3 Uncharted games on PS4 before this. You could play all the games in this Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection on PS5, right, like before this game even came out. So let's talk about that. So Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection came out in January of 2022, and it includes Uncharted 4 and The Lost Legacy, which this was pretty much just like standalone DLC for Uncharted 4. It was kind of like, hey, let's do a side story, just kind of an expansion on Uncharted 4, but, you know, make it its own game. And that's what The Lost Legacy is. Yeah, so this game is just basically bundling these two games together. Games that were already about $10 each. So I picked this up and I played it. I played a couple hours of A Thief's End, mainly because I haven't played Uncharted 4 in a bit, and I do enjoy Uncharted 4. And I played it, and it is Uncharted 4. The load times were definitely much better. You know, I kind of just hopped right into the game, and you know, good time. And it still looked really good, but like, you know, it looked like Uncharted 4. I did not notice any difference in terms of visual fidelity. There were some changes in terms of, you know, controller gimmicks, like the haptic feedback on the DualSense, and using the adaptive triggers. You know, like when you would fire a gun, you kind of felt it stagger a little bit. You know, that's always cool to see in PS5 games. But other than that, it's just Uncharted 4 again. And yeah, pretty much when you look on the back, they just have like everything listed right here. That's kind of like the main selling point of this collection. You know, you have the controller additions, haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. All right, you know, that's kind of neat, but you know, it's kind of like the equivalent of like a Wii U game having some stuff to do on the gamepad. Nothing crazy. It's just like, oh man, there's a map down there. It's just like cool, but it's just like, you know, that didn't sell the Wii U, didn't it? 3D audio, 4K visuals, and targeting 120 frames per second. Oh boy. It's just like they did not need remastered at all. But, you know, hey, I'll take it. It's cool to see these games, you know, get a nice new coat of paint, you know, like they may not have needed it, but might as well kind of tweak them now, make them look all nice, so then, you know, they're ready for the future before they even become dated, you know? Like, you know, hey, I get it. And hey, this was released at a budget price, $50. Yeah, $20 off a brand new game from Sony, $70. Yeah, for 50 bucks. I don't know about this one, man. There were like remakes of games, full-on remakes that cost $40. 40 bucks for like a remake, and this is a remaster of two games that are like some of the most budget games to buy on PS4, mainly because like everybody bought them. They're really dirt cheap. Like I've seen Uncharted 4 go for like $5-10 bucks. And on top of that, you can play them on PS5 right now. You know, the PS5 is basically fully backwards compatible with the PS4. So, you know, you could pop in your Uncharted 4 and Uncharted The Lost Legacy disc and just play those games right now as they are. And they still look amazing. Like they barely look any different. But hey, I'm not one to really say that because I bought this collection. And they obviously kind of put this out not only to just kind of put something that looks quality enough on PS5 out, just kind of fill out the library, and also this kind of coincided with the Uncharted movie that released around the same time, so I think that was kind of a way for Sony to be like, hey, let's put out something Uncharted on the PS5, let's get Uncharted talk going a lot during the movie's release, all that stuff, so... You know, like, hey, whatever. I think it would have been really nice for them to include, like, the whole Nathan Drake collection as well. Just basically include most of the major Uncharted entries other than the PlayStation Vita games. But even then, it would have been amazing to see them take those Vita games and put them into this massive Uncharted collection. Basically just give you the whole Uncharted series all in one go. And if this was just kind of like a one-off little thing, whatever. They keep happening. And I played a little bit of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. Same damn game. Who would have thought? Like, even when they showed off, like, a trailer showing, like, oh, man, all these upgrades, like it didn't look any different. In fact, if you swapped the subtitles for, like, what's the original and what's the remake, I swear to God, I'm sure most people would look at, like, the original and be like, oh, that's the new version. That looks better. I'm not saying this looks worse. I'm just saying, like, the differences are so negligible that it doesn't matter. And again, all these games are already playable on PS5 via backwards compatibility. You know, sometimes, you know, you get stuff like Death Stranding Director's Cut, which does add a decent amount of content, which is really cool. But it just overall feels kind of like a waste of development time. Just putting all this marketing energy and putting all this development time into making PS5 versions of games you could already play on the PS5. I don't know, it's just not exciting. It's nice to be able to play some of these games with quicker load times and maybe some controller features, but many times, PS4 developers and publishers just update the PS4 games for PS5 for free. Like, you can just download and upgrade. There's even that whole, like, PS5 upgrade available icon on a lot of PS4 games that just show you, it's just like, yeah, you can just buy the PS4 game, plug it in your PS5, and then just download an update that gives it all these PS5 features, and that's really cool. And some people are doing that, and some people are doing this. And hey, like, I get this business practice. It makes sense, but it just kind of feels pointless, especially considering that I saw people complaining about PS4 games being remasters. Like, it's just like, oh, what's the point of this? That's horrible, blah, blah, blah. Like, does anybody else remember that era? Like, looking back, why were people complaining about Tomb Raider Definitive Edition? What is there to gain from that? And now we're here with even more pointless remasters and PS5 releases. Anybody else ever feel like you see like a PS5 version of a game and it releases alongside like a PS4 version of a game and you're just kind of like, why? Like, I've seen like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection got a PS4 physical release and a PS5 physical release. What's gonna be the difference? It's a collection of NES and Game Boy and arcade games. What is the PS5 version going to entail? Like, could you just buy the PS4 version and play that on your PS5? if you buy the PS5 version, like, what's the major difference? It's just a native PS5 version for a collection of games that run on a damn calculator? I don't know, it's just kind of weird. And, you know, I'm sure in a couple years, this stuff is going to be just completely like, oh, yep, that's just how things are, you know? It's not worth, like, complaining about. And I'm not really complaining, per se. It just kind of feels... It's just questionable. It's just kind of something where I'm like, why? Why are we doing this? It just feels a little weird, especially, like, I'll go back to Uncharted. It doesn't contain the multiplayer for Uncharted 4. Like you can buy this version for like $10 and get a multiplayer and single player experience on PS5, and you could do this one for $50, and you just get 2 single-player campaigns that you could probably get for, like, I don't know, a Big Mac. It's just, there's a lot of confusing, weird aspects of this generation, like Sony charging for, like, PS5 upgrades of games, but then Microsoft just gives you, like, smart delivery, which you plug the Xbox One game in, you get the Xbox Series X version, there you go, you're done. But then other developers and publishers still charge for the game, like Activision does. But then you also have, Sony doing stuff like, oh man, here's a collector's edition that includes a steelbook and then a digital code because we want to sell PS5 digital edition owners this collector's edition. So we're just going to include a code, even though they bought the digital edition because they don't want clutter on their shelves. So here's a bunch of bullshit. I don't know, there's just a lot of stuff about this generation that's just kind of weird. But I'm not one to be like, video games stink now. Nah, it's just kind of like the video game business practices are just kind of weird. It feels like they are always trying to find new revenue streams and trying to find ways to make as much money as possible. But because of that, it feels like video game releases have become a little more boring lately. It feels a little more like, yep, that makes sense, instead of like, oh, hell yes! So I hope it picks up sometime soon. I feel like they're kind of dipping their toes a little too much into like doing stuff that's not fun or exciting, and more so like, yeah, great, that's okay, yeah, sure, that works for me. But in the end, at least thank God that they're not remaking a remaster of a game that's not even 10 years old yet. Oh, son of a bitch!